why a clear lens is so important. So really what this is about becoming aware of buzzwords and phrases that are designed to change how you feel about ideas. You know, we talk about, I watched a show that was talking about framing, guys called the BS guys, the behavioral science guys, and they were talking about how the MX missile, on one context, they are weapons of mass destruction, but if you frame them as peacekeeping missiles, don't you feel so much better? Framing is really important, and having a clear lens is really important, because what you ought to know is that missiles all blow things up. They all do the same thing either way. So here's some examples. Unhoused or houselessness rather than homeless, transient, or vagrant. So when you're reading the news and you hear the words unhoused or houselessness, they are actually intentionally trying to ensure that our attention is on a housing crisis rather than on bad decisions, addiction, recovery, mental illness solutions, and the whatnot. So what it does is it connects my feelings and yours about my own high rent or mortgage prices, or yours, to homelessness. So you have a right to be outraged because you are part of this drama that's really not. You're not part of the drama. You've made good choices. You can afford your own rent and mortgage. We have a news article that kind of talks about this in the bulletin. The title is "Faces of Homelessness Meet Central Oregon's Houseless Community." And again, it's used routinely. It's intentionally used to make you think, is my problem homelessness? And having a home it means a whole lot different than a house, having a house. And anybody knows who's had a house for any length of time that sometimes having a house isn't the same as having a home. Okay, how about this? No other options rather than options we just don't like. So the purpose that they use in saying there's no other options is to diminish existing options and set the stage for demanding taxpayer-funded options. So here's an example, and this was used in a JPR article, Jefferson Public Radio article, where actually what they're doing is they're quoting the judge from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in the lawsuit against both Boise and in the lawsuits against Boise and against Grants Pass. And it says this: as long as there is no options of sleeping indoors, the government cannot criminalize indigent homeless people for sleeping outdoors on public property on the false premise that they had a choice in the matter. Okay, and the argument is, and this is from that was from Ronald E. Bush, the court's chief magistrate judge, who wrote in the ruling. Now, the problem with this is that they're making it seem like there are no other options. In the meantime, there are gospel rescue missions everywhere who have plenty of room in their programs, and most gospel rescue missions that I've talked to in the state of Oregon are at about half their capacity, okay, and somewhere at half or maybe even less than half. Now, this didn't always used to be, but suddenly has been in the last 3 or 4 years. And again, when they say, well, there's no other options, well, sure there are. There's gospel rescue missions. Oh, but those guys have rules, and they're Christians. And you go, okay, but that didn't change what I just said. There are other options. They're just not ones that you like. And that's part of the thing. You can't just decide arbitrarily that this option isn't an option because Christians are offering it, or because there are rules to make the place safe, which leads us really to the next framing low or no barrier shelters. So they're going to call something a low/no barrier shelter rather than safe and healthy shelters with rules to ensure that they stay that way. So the purpose behind these kinds of things is to infer that rules are impossible for many homeless people to abide by, and thereby are not good for all people. Now, we all understand that rules are good for all people. In fact, it's rules that are good for all people that make society work and make society safe and make society healthy. And the article in reference here is an example of framing, and this was an example. I forget the article. It's out of Idaho. Says this. It says, Idaho police raid protest in downtown Boise, arrest one, and seize more camping items. Now, when you talk about the camping items and you go through the article, there's drug paraphernalia, there's drugs themselves, there's all kinds of stuff that's illegal and shouldn't be in there. Okay, the article here is an example of framing of how they want your readers to view police as authoritarians who raid and arrest and seize. But they also demonstrate, unbeknownst to them, what will result from low barrier shelters, despite the attempt to make the homeless as people looking just for a place to sleep. The issue is, if you have low barrier shelters, low or no barrier shelters, what you're going to find is really lawlessness. And in that lawlessness, you're going to find all the things that you would expect in lawlessness. You're going to find people trafficking one another. You're going to find drugs and illegal drug paraphernalia and weaponry and all kinds of other things, people doing harm to each other. And that's interesting because our next framing word is harm reduction. So rather than, you will call it harm reduction rather than sterile syringes, naloxone, and associated training and safe sex supplies. Okay, so we'll call it harm reduction. The purpose here is to move societal thinking towards this, towards the idea that arrests and consequences are what are really bad, rather than drug use, death, and the decay that's associated with it. So, really, anytime that you hear harm reduction, what you really your first thought should come is free needles, okay? And a great example of where this is being employed in its fullest is our major cities up and down the West Coast. San Francisco would be a prime example. So San Francisco has a budget of over $3 million a year in giving away free needles. And if you're looking for an excellent article demonstrating the direction that it would put our cities in harm, the harm reductionists would like to move our society. Read this article at City Journal /San Francisco harm reduction policies, a nightmare. And just look at the damage that's being done here. So we've got the City Journal article up there. San Francisco, if you look in this picture, you'll see that there are a bunch of tents in this city center that's really designed for harm reduction. Free needles are given out, all kinds of clean drugs, and yada, yada, yada. The city spends $60,000 per year per tent. That's what your tax dollars are going for, San Franciscans. So again, harm reduction, all in the name of harm reduction. If you want to find good drugs, go to a harm reduction place. I don't know. Here's the other thing you got to recognize: bait and switch tactics. Okay, so in the case of Blake versus the city of Grants Pass, the main issue that was successfully defended had to do with where a person sleeps. Now, this was clever logistics by the attorneys, and not very clever logistics by the city attorney in Grants Pass. The argument was repeatedly made about how unfair the city was to punish a person for where they slept. The argument should have been countered by saying that no one is afraid of having their children cut on broken sleeping people while being raped while jogging by someone sleeping on a park bench. No one is outraged by vandalism that people make in their sleep in our parks or by the drugs sold by narcoleptics on our freeway exits. When a teenage seasonal city park employee lifts up a bucket that was cleverly placed over a sprinkler only to find herself covered in cleverly placed human fecal matter, this is an incident that actually took place in the city of Grants Pass in 2021. No one thinks, wow, what a random thing to do while somebody's sleeping. If we allow the image in our frame to remain focused on a person's need for sleep rather than on crime and the general destructive behavior that happens from these people coming into our parks and setting up their tent camps, then we'll continue to lose court case after court case and our ability to keep our communities safe. This is what's going on, and this is why framing is so important. Look, you have to have your eyes open to it. You have to see it. And once you see it, here's the cool thing about it. You don't have to fall victim to it anymore. Once you understand the framing, you don't have to let it rule the conversation, but you have to listen for buzzwords, and you have to be prepared to see how the framing is manipulating how you feel.